Good evening. Thanks for joining us. DNA, palm print evidence, and whether statements were coerced or a confession. Those are the focus of a double murder cold case in Waupaca County. The trial of Tony Haase getting underway today for the murders of Tana Togstead and Tim Mumbrew back in 1992.
During opening statements this afternoon, prosecutors saying that DNA evidence found on Tana Togstead connects Haase to the crime, as does a bloody palm print that was found and Hase's own memories of the crime. But the defense calling this evidence degraded, mishandled, unreliable. They point to someone else as a suspect. Taylor Zebel is live outside the Waupaca County Courthouse with the first day of trial. Taylor.
Cammie, the prosecution pointing today to evidence they say shows that Tony Haase is responsible for the two deaths. The defense pushing back, saying those involved in the investigation, including law enforcement, investigators, and DNA analysts, were just desperate to find someone to blame for the murder that happened over 30 years ago. Defense attorney John Birdsall made it clear that Hase's uncle, Jeff Teal, should have been a suspect since day one. Teal was never charged with these crimes. Teal, who died of suicide in 1995, was described by Hase's attorney as a, quote, bad guy who had a psychotic mind. But the prosecuting attorney pointed out Hase's DNA taken at a traffic stop in 2022 matched bodily fluids found on Tana's body. The palm print on the door is said to have matched Hase's left hand, but the defense argues it was unidentifiable because it was not handled properly and that one of the detective's fingerprints were also found on that door. Defense attorney Birdsall repeatedly pointed out DNA testing that was done did not follow proper guidelines and is unreliable.
You're going to hear that during that interview, Tony Haase agreed to submit to what they call a buccal swab, a cheek swab. That cheek swab was sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, where an STR DNA profile was developed from that cheek swab.
You're going to see the utterly botched crime scene collection of both fingerprints and DNA, and blood for that matter.
Right after opening statements that did last about an hour and a half, 3 witnesses were called up, including Tim Mumbrew's brother, who says Tim was a great father who loved his family. Tana's best friend and Tana's sister recalled their last moments with Tana and Tim before they were murdered. Reporting live in Waupaca County, Taylor Zebel, Action 2 News.